All right. Hi, guys. I'm Katie, and I run marketing here at Right Side Up. For those of you who aren't familiar with Right Side Up, we're a collective of marketing specialists who have helped more than 600 companies hit their goals. We have expertise across all marketing channels, including performance, lifecycle, SEO, social, analytics, and creative, to name a few. Today, we'll be digging into B2B brand advertising. We'll share best practices as well as common pitfalls to avoid in order to help you craft compelling brand ad campaigns that will resonate with your audience and drive measurable results. I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speaker, Kevin Lord-Berry. Kevin co-founded Right%, a Right Side Up venture that focuses on scaling fast-growing B2B companies in every vertical. Over the past 10 years, he's managed millions in ROI positive ad spend for brands like DoorDash, Zenefits, Masterclass, Segment, On Deck, and more. Before I turn it over to Kevin, a couple of quick logistics to cover. Please submit your questions throughout the session using Zoom's Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. And second, I will be recording this presentation and sharing the recording with all registrants, along with Kevin's slides with you guys in the coming days. So keep an eye on your inboxes for those. All right, that's enough from me. Kevin, the floor is officially yours.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. You may notice today, if you've seen any of my previous presentations, that I'm talking slower and more carefully. I am getting over laryngitis, but I'm good for this, and you guys might even enjoy it that I'm not rushing as fast as I normally do. So with that, I'd love to get started. Today's presentation is on where B2B advertising campaigns go wrong. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I've seen them go wrong for other companies often. And I think there's pretty easy ways to avoid some of those pitfalls. So that's what we're going to go over today. Exactly what it says here on the ticker. 8 parts to this slide deck. Don't be scared. It's not that long. Shouldn't take more than half an hour. Quick overview of what a brand is, how things currently work for companies, the common mistakes from the default setups, how algorithmic feedback loops work and how that affects things. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. What does work for brand advertising? How do you measure it, and exceptions? So first, just let's get the easy stuff out of the way. What's a brand? Everyone knows brands are really useful. Everyone knows that it helps your company be more profitable, close deals better, et cetera, et cetera. There's really 3 factors that go into what you're trying to achieve with a brand campaign. First is you want awareness of your company and your target market, right? You want them to know you exist when you run a brand campaign. Second, you want them to know your reputation. So the reputation of your company, not just awareness, but what do they think of you? And third, the other part is just your consistent visual identity, voice, all that good stuff that people think about when it comes to branding. So, to promote those goals, awareness, reputation, and making sure everything seems like a consistent story, there are default ways that I've seen companies do brand campaigns. Over and over again, a company comes up with a brand campaign. This is generally what they do. They pick channels with enough volume to reach users. Usually they want a big push for brand campaigns. So you see Meta a lot, you see YouTube a lot. You also see things like programmatic display, OTT, that kind of stuff that often runs a lot of inventory on Meta and YouTube, sometimes on LinkedIn, but generally it's, large volume channels because people want to go further than they are with their current direct response campaigns. Second, they pick targeting that makes sense for their ICP or their target market. So they might pick, if they're targeting tech companies, the interest of tech plus, companies, Google's guess at which companies are oversized of 100 employees, like that kind of targeting. And then they run ads to those audiences, optimizing for top of funnel metrics. Because if they were optimizing for bottom of funnel metrics, like closed ones and so on, closed deals, opportunities, they wouldn't be doing a brand campaign. So usually the default is they optimize for impressions, number of people seeing their brand ads, or video views, same story. So this is the typical approach. Now, typically performance is measured in one of 3 ways. One is simple top of funnel metrics. People say, oh, our video got 10,000 views. Our brand landing page story testimonial got 8,000 views, that kind of thing. That's top of funnel metrics. Before and after surveys. So companies that are a little more sophisticated with their brand campaigns will survey the audience they're going to target before they start, and then survey them again after they run the brand campaign. And then they can measure, if they're asking the question, have you heard about us? What do you think about us? Ideally, you want to see those metrics improve before and after. and lift tests. So, if we run brand campaigns in half the country and not the other half, do we see better overall performance on every metric and awareness in that half of the geos where we actually ran ads? Those are the three ways that people currently measure brand campaigns. So now that I've told you the default, how people do it now, where do B2B brand campaigns go wrong? The fundamental problem is with targeting. So we mentioned that companies, they try to find these big channels, so Facebook, YouTube, or OTT, display networks, whatever. And so they serve on these platforms with large audiences, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. But the problem with these bigger audiences, so like outside of like tight audiences on LinkedIn, is that the targeting you can select is not good enough on its own to work for B2B. So why is that the case? How come the targeting there works for direct response, but doesn't work for these brand campaigns? And the answer is the algorithmic feedback loops of the ad platforms. So what is an algorithmic feedback loop? So for example, say you're running direct response campaigns, you're targeting HR managers, that's your target market, and you're optimizing for them to fill out a lead on your site, a lead form. Now, someone is much more likely to fill out a lead form from your ad, which is targeting HR managers, if they are an HR manager, right? And so there's an automatic signal that gets sent to the platforms that says, okay, this, the people who are signing up are in our target market. In this example, they are HR managers. And it trains the platforms to find your customers better. So, the cycle of B2B advertising is you start a campaign, you optimize towards a conversion event. So that can be, lead sign up, it can be opportunity, it can be something else. Those conversion events train the ad platform AI, and that continuously, improves performance. It makes conversions cheaper, and it gets your campaigns more and more targeted towards your target market or your ICP. That's an example of a good algorithmic feedback loop that you get from direct response campaigns. Now, if you're running a brand campaign, all of this breaks, right? You don't actually have a conversion event that means anything. Again, if you're running a typical brand campaign where you're targeting video views, impressions, and so on, there's just no way to know that those impressions and video views are actually in your ICP, because again, the targeting on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube for B2B, if you take out the conversion event factor, it's not good enough. It doesn't have enough of your B2B audience. That is too much noise. Now, it's actually worse than it sounds because of how ad platforms use auctions to determine the price to reach a given user. So for instance, if you're running direct response campaigns on Google or Facebook or whatever, you are paying a higher cost per click and cost per impression compared to the average target on Facebook, because Facebook has recognized that these users who will actually respond to B2B ads or any kind of advertising are more valuable. And so the cost to get your ad in front of 1,000 of them is fairly high. That's fine in direct response because you can measure the back-end results of it. Now, if you are bidding on anybody in that target market and there's no optimization on conversion event, what happens is the other users who are not qualified for your B2B product are going to be reached more and more in the auction because they're cheaper. The lowest value users on each platform are the ones the platforms are going to give you when you're bidding just for clicks and impressions. So if you're optimizing for those top of funnel metrics, video views and clicks, the algorithm is going to say, hey, no problem, boss. I'll get you those as cheap as possible, but it's going to be the least qualified portion of your audience. So again, this is an audience you selected, like, business owners with 50 plus employees on Facebook or YouTube, that kind of thing. So if the typical approach doesn't work, and the typical approach, again, big audiences, top of funnel impressions. And by the way, the reason why people do that technique is because in B2C, it works pretty well. In B2C, almost anybody can buy your product. So if you're showing, your ad for your new type of toaster that you want to brand to everybody, it's kind of okay that a large portion of the audience are not your ideal customer, as long as you hit the ideal ones. In B2B, a much, much smaller percentage of your audience are actually qualified, like probably 80% of the audience is not. And so it completely changes the dynamics of brand campaigns. So what does work? One is precise audiences. So I've mentioned how one of the big issues is that the audiences on the big ad serving platforms are not good enough for B2B. So you can avoid that by having very precise audiences. So one way to do that is on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has more precise B2B targeting than all of the bigger platforms. You're going to get less reach, but you can craft a target audience. The other way to do it is to use an uploaded or targeted list. So if you have a list your sales team's already reaching out to, or you already vetted a list using a direct response campaign, any way that you can get a precise list of accounts that you know are qualified, all of a sudden that algorithmic optimization loop doesn't matter anymore. So this is one way to solve the brand problem. You just need a really good list. And yes, this is very similar to a typical ABM strategy, which is kind of a mix of a brand push. It's just at a smaller scale, but sometimes that's the only way to do it. If you still want to hit that big audience, you really want to go heavy on brand, you want to expand awareness of your product as much as possible, the way to do it is to optimize to top of funnel content where you can still qualify the user. So a click and a view does not qualify the user. But if you have an ebook or a resource or a tool, and there's any level of qualification on it, any level of gating, where you can say, sign up and people say, yes, I have over 50 employees. Yes, I'm this title. Yes, I'm that title. All of this can be tagged and it fixes the algorithmic feedback loop problem while still providing a higher level of brand value than just your typical ad of get a demo. And you can make this, a very, very light experience if you want like a low touch brand campaign. The important thing is you can qualify them in some way, even buttons on the page, like even if you don't want to collect email, like buttons on selections that say like, yes, I'm XYZ qualified for this business. No, I'm just interested. Even that kind of thing helps a lot because you can actually optimize the ad algorithms. So that is what actually works, either precise audiences or top of funnel content for B2B brand campaigns. Here's how you measure that performance. So I mentioned all of these as typical options at the start. I'm going to go through them now and say which ones are good or bad. So first, simple top of funnel metrics. This is how many views, clicks, video watches. I think you can guess my answer here, but they're not useful metrics. There's no way to verify that these clicks or views are actually from your target audience. Again, in B2C, that doesn't matter because anybody could buy your product. In B2B, clicks that are not qualified are useless. So don't use these to measure your brand campaigns. It's vanity metrics. Second is surveys. So again, this is something that works very well in B2C. It's not great for B2B for the same reason. So the way these surveys work on YouTube, Facebook, and so on, the brand surveys, is that they are polling the entire audience that you target, and then polling that same audience after. But if you're not using tight audiences, like I mentioned, if you're doing the typical thing and doing kind of broad audiences on YouTube, Facebook, and so on, the survey uses the same algorithm that ad targeting does. So you still end up getting too many survey results from B2C people that you don't care about the answers for. So I've actually seen this twice in large scale surveys for B2B. The before and after for those broad audiences was not valuable. Third, this is what does work, lift tests. If you want to run a true testable brand campaign for a B2B company, you need to have a control portion and experiment portion. Usually the best way to do that is by geography. To test this, you need fairly large geographic splits. I recommend, half the USA versus the other half. You need a good amount of sample size. Generally, these tests are not cheap to do well, like $50,000 to $100,000. There's ways to do it with less, but that's usually what I see, like getting true good results for B2B companies. And this is really just the gold standard. There's like complicated ways to do lift tests, and there's easier ways. I recommend a Bayesian approach as the easiest. You can Google, Bayesian A/B tests. There's also much more complicated multivariate testing. But for most B2B companies, unless you have like a data scientist on your team who knows how to do them, I'd stick with the simpler stuff. Exceptions to these rules. So if you have a non-algorithmic, non-digital ad channel with good enough targeting, you can make it work for brand campaigns. The reason for that is non-algorithmic channels don't have that same auction issue, where if you run a campaign optimizing for views, you get the worst viewers. So for instance, billboard ads at airports, a lot of enterprise B2B companies do them because they work. Business travelers are much more likely to be B2B and the costs are right. So you get those B2B impressions and you don't care about the, the other ones who see it who aren't qualified. There's a bunch of examples like this. So you can make brand campaigns work outside of digital, but in digital, you have to be very careful about ad auction dynamics. So the big takeaways: don't optimize for clicks, views, or video views. If you're targeting a large audience, you'll get too many non-qualified views. It'll be an unhelpful brand campaign. Instead, use narrow, proven audiences, and these can be uploaded lists or carefully done audiences on LinkedIn, or optimize top-of-funnel content downloads that you can qualify. Anything that gives you and the platform a signal, yes, the people clicking this are qualified. Make sure when you run any kind of brand campaign to estimate the sample size you need for statistical significance before you set a budget and geo combination. You usually need more geographies and budgets than you think. Almost every brand campaign I've seen planned did not plan for enough testing that they needed. They underestimated the amount of data that they needed to make to get a statistically significant result. So that's it. I think we're finished a little earlier than planned, so we have plenty of time for Q&A if there's questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. So much good information in there. And like, you still covered that quickly, even though you said you were going to slow roll it at the beginning.
That was slow for me. Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. Cool. So like Kevin said, we're opening up the floor to your questions and we're looking forward to chatting. So we have one that came in during your talk from David, and David wants to know, what third-party data providers do you suggest for audience creation?
That's a great question. So I would say for the biggest companies, the one that we see work really well is 6 Sense, but it's very expensive. It's like $100,000 a year annual contract. For smaller companies or like mid-size, metadata.io. I don't like their ad building capabilities, but I do like their audience building capabilities. So that's good. At the lowest level, I would say tools like ZoomInfo and Crunchbase and other suppliers, like anywhere you can get a list that you'd use for outbound sales, is equally as good for creating audiences on the platforms.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And Jason wants to know, what's your approach to finding creative that works?
So I actually have a whole nother presentation on making creative.
And it's a good one.
Yes. So I would say check out right%.com and the Education Center. There's a couple decks on making good creative there. In short, in summary, just like how in this presentation, I talked about the differences between B2C and B2B for brand building, like the dynamics create different rules. The same is true in B2B. So in B2C, the product speaks for itself. It's rarely abstract. It's a t-shirt, a toaster, whatever. That's why UGC, user-generated content, works so well, because it lets people just show them using the product, and it tells the whole story. In B2B, the product is almost always quite abstract. It's spreadsheets, it's lines on a page. And so what you need is text to simplify that abstraction. So what we find is that the visual headline, or the text superimposed on the ad image or video, makes up 75% of performance. In most of our ad accounts, the best performing ad is nothing but gigantic text filling the square. So that's your quick answer.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And we can include a link to those materials about creative, because we do have a lot of great stuff that you've put together and presented on in the past, actually. So it's good call out. What other questions do you guys have for Kevin?
My presentation was too definitive, but well-rounded.
You hit all the common questions. Cool. We'll give it another minute or so. Oh, we do have, I saw someone's hand go up and then go down. Might have a question coming shortly. And in the meantime, would love to get your guys' feedback on the information that Kevin has shared so far. I'm just going to launch this little poll, have that floating off over there. All right, what other questions about B2B brand advertising do you have? Kevin, are there any other common misconceptions or mistakes you've seen when starting to work with clients on the performance side about their brand ads? Like, how do you mesh the two together when you're advising on one?
So one other thing is there's an unhealthy division at a lot of companies between like the brand side of marketing and direct response, where direct response is held to very specific targets and brand is not held to any targets. And that's not really sustainable. So I think the most effective work sort of combine those and, make sure to measure all the brand efforts. You can't measure it the same way. It's not direct attribution, but being able to measure it holistically is very, very important. The second really common thing with brand campaigns in general is creative. So a lot of people think you have to make this beautiful 1.5 minute like video with excellent cinematography, like that's a brand ad. And that's fine, but you have to also hook people with it because no one gives a fuck. No one cares about your brand as much as you do. So if you're going to have that 1.5 minute video, have a hook at the start. Just like direct response ads, it doesn't have to be tacky, but something that gets their attention and says this is worth your time. It's still as important in brand as with anything else.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a question from Rye. Any specific advice to the prop tech or real estate space?
Oh, and I see another one on brand fatigue. Prop tech.
You want to answer that one first? You could do either.
No, I'll start with this one. So prop tech or real estate. So I have actually worked in property tech before. I would say the typical B to SMB advice that I give. So right%.com, we have a guide to advertising both to verticals as well as to small businesses. I think both those guides would be useful. Prop tech is no different than any other sort of vertical of B to SMB. As far as brand fatigue goes, this is actually a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to show you another graph and share my screen with it. Just popping that up so you can give me a second. Just brand fatigue, perfect. Okay, so here's the thing I wanted to show you. So this is a typical B2B, an aggregation of our B2B ad accounts. And what we find is accounts that don't have content in their ads. So I say no gated content here, but it's really just no content. Ad accounts where they just say, get a demo, talk to our sales team, etc. They always see a steady decrease in effectiveness. And this is due to audience and ad fatigue. And you can fix this with new creative, new everything, but not like only temporarily. If you're always promoting the same offer and there's no variation on that offer, you will get fatigued. However, if you make gated content part of your strategy, so this ebook in Q1, this tool in Q2, another ebook in Q2, it varies your offers enough that you keep audience attention and interest. So to me, that's the biggest way we see accounts prevent ad fatigue in the long term. It's making sure you keep your offers interesting to get people's attention. And the data speaks for itself. There's no fatigue when you have that varied content. There is fatigue if you don't.
Awesome. I think that's a great chart to pull up. And you answered the other question that I was going to serve up next, which is great. Moving right along, I have a question from Brian. What unique considerations would you have if your product category has an exceptionally long conversion timeline? And he provided an example of selling to municipalities and large organizations.
It's a great question. So the first, I'll direct you to another article on the website. So we have a guide, Advertising to the Enterprise, which goes over just that. And that's on right%.com in the resource base. The short answer is, what you need is leading indicators. So I talked about conversion events, right? You're never, ever going to be able to optimize on a closed one in an enterprise situation. It takes months. It's too big. There's too many touches. What you have to find is the earliest stage events that correlate to someone becoming a closed deal 6 months from now. So again, that can be a lead form fill where someone says, I have 1,000+ employees and my title is director of X. And we, have a budget of X or Y. That could be a signal. It could be if you're a PLG company, someone comes in and they make their first, Trello board as a random example, and your data says, if someone doesn't do that in the first 24 hours, they never will. Those kind of signals are vital to all of your marketing efforts in B2 Enterprise because it's the only signal you have for a long time.
Thanks, Kevin. What other questions? We'll give it another few minutes to let folks think of those questions or maybe ask the ones they've been sitting on. All questions are good questions. What are some of the brands, Kevin, that you think are doing B2B brand advertising particularly well? If you know any, not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
We can also circle back if,
Yeah.
and include that in the follow-up email too.
I want to say Ramp, like just off the top of my head, that they've done a good job with the various aspects of it.
Cool. All right. Any other questions you guys have about B2B brand advertising? Haven't seen any come in yet. Any final words of wisdom you'd like to share, Kevin?
I think that's it. B2B brand campaigns kind of have a mystical quality to them. People talk about, oh, we're planning on running a brand campaign, and everyone's a little nervous. No one knows how it works, but it's not as complicated as people make it seem. As long as you set up a good lift test, you have a good plan going in of how to actually reach your target market. You follow the simple stuff in this deck, you can absolutely do it and get results that you can learn from and report to the board with. And, we've done it successfully before.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. And for all of you who attended today, we're so glad you could join us. As I mentioned earlier on, we will be sharing the recording with you guys in the coming days. We'll be doing a recap on the blog, and we're looking forward to any questions or follow-up thoughts you guys have on the session. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. Have a great day, guys.